Hello, I'm Dr Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to Well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. Despite the fact that Google wouldn't be invented for another 7 years, and the first iPhone released 16 years later, to the great surprise of my teenagers, I used a computer to type and print out my major assignments during Year 12 in 1991. For one project in particular, I would type out headings and text, print each page using a dot matrix printer. And for those of you who do not know about a dot matrix printer, you might use Google, but also you might picture continuous paper fed through a printer with cogs on each side and perforations on each side of the page that you could tear off the holes. Once I'd printed the paper, I would cut the heading and the text out separately. I would carefully glue them onto coloured cardboard. I'd cut each out again, leaving a neat coloured border. I'd then glue them in position on another piece of card and place them in an A4 display folder, eventually filling the folder with nearly 40 similarly prepared pages. I wouldn't settle for anything less than perfection. This was life for me for a very long time. Hours and hours spent on getting insignificant details just so. More screwed up pieces of paper than I could count. And the person who always had the highest expectations of me was me. I wonder if you can relate, or perhaps you know somebody who can. It took a very long time to get here, but I now live by two mantras. Very good is good enough, and done is better than perfect. My guest today gets it. Dr Clarissa Ong is passionate about how to manage perfectionism. She's an assistant professor at the University of Toledo and is one of two magnificent authors of the book, The Anxious Perfectionist: How to Manage Perfectionism-Driven Anxiety Using Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. Clarissa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Clarissa, could you tell us a little bit about what led you to your interest in this work and your own personal path with perfectionism?
So my research with perfectionism was kind of serendipitous. My graduate school advisor, Mike Tuig, at the time received a grant from the International OCD Foundation, and it was to study perfectionism. And I thought it was interesting, so I took the project on, and then it kind of became something that I gradually was more and more interested in. And the reason I grew interested in it, I think, was that I found a lot of aspects of it relatable. I think most people, at that time I was in grad school, so most people around me probably could relate. I think I've had periods of my life where kind of the anecdote you shared at the start of the recording, I can also relate to that, kind of rereading words and like, should this be a the or should this be an a? Things that are probably not that helpful to kind of fixate on in the big picture. And I think learning more about ACT, learning about values really opened up kind of a different path or life that could be possible. And so I think that sort of my experience, but also having more flexibility around my own rules through studying ACT. And then I chanced upon this study that I was working on. So I think it kind of all came together.
Thank you. And I wonder if you could start by telling us, what is perfectionism? How do you define it, and how does it show up for people in different ways?
The standard definition for perfectionism is striving or trying to meet unrealistic, high standards, basing your self-worth on your ability to meet those unrealistic and high standards. And then the kind of natural consequence of that is being really down on yourself when you inevitably fail to meet those standards. Another way I think about it too is perfectionism can be seen as really about rule following, but there are different types of rules. I think the obvious rule is I should be XYZ. And so shoulds show up a lot in perfectionism. I think there can be rules about the way the world works. So if we think of perfectionism more about rigidity than anything else, it's I have to do things a certain way, or people should be doing things a certain way. This rigidity about how things work or how things should be. And so because it's about rigidity, the form it takes can be vastly different. If we think of like a quote high achieving person with perfectionism, it looks like, oh, you work 80 hours a week, you produce really excellent work, all the details are finessed to almost flawless standard. But it could also be someone who looks like they're not producing anything. So it could be an artist who doesn't make any art because nothing is perfect enough. And the only thing that's worth showing to the world is something that's good enough. Right? And good enough means I have to feel like it's good enough. So there are all these rules built into that. It could look like someone being very particular about how things in their living space is arranged or in their office is arranged, or having certain set schedules. And so if we think of perfectionism as a spectrum, there are many ways you can see it's adaptive or neutral, and there are ways that it could be ineffective or distressing. So yeah, that's sort of how it can show up in different ways.
I think a lot of people can relate to the idea that not producing and not presenting and not shipping, as Seth Godin would say, not shipping the work. I think a lot of people can relate to that, where the idea that putting it out into the world, especially a world where things are so public, and if we are creating something and promoting it, then it'll be on social media. So then it's open for criticism. It's open for feedback in a way that it never would have been back when I was growing up, before Google and before social media. And so there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear.
Social media is a good example because I think that I'm not that in tune with social media, to be honest, but when I read about social media, it seems like there's a trend toward greater mental health awareness and people being more vulnerable and sharing things. But at least many years ago, and probably is still a bit true, that social media is where you kind of get to brag a bit about your life, about how things are going well, or how you're at this cool restaurant, or how you're taking this like amazing vacation. And so we have this distorted view of what our baseline expectation should be. It feels like our baseline is doing cool things when really, I don't know, 80% of the time we're just lounging and hanging out and doing, boring things like jobs and things like that. So I agree. I think it fosters that unrealistic expectation and almost feeds it.
That idea that there will be criticism or there might be feedback. And I remember when I started the podcast, I felt so vulnerable. I felt incredibly vulnerable putting a piece of me out into the world, a piece of me and my life and my heart and my thinking and my connections with others as I would interview different people. And that vulnerability held me back. I knew that I was moving towards producing something and that I wouldn't stop, but this idea that it had to be a certain way, and that I have always been a person with high expectations of myself and a high achiever. And in the end, I did a podcasting workshop that talked about making something meaningful for some people, make something meaningful for some. Reach a handful of people. Even if you reach 5 or 6 people, you'd have the attention of an elevator full of people, and make it and get it out there, and you'll evolve and things will improve over time. But we can't, we strive for excellence and we strive to do a good job, but often we can't achieve a better outcome until we start doing the thing that we've set our mind to, can we?
Yeah, I think it's exactly that. It's almost like this all or nothing mindset, right? It's either I don't do it at all, or I do it and it's perfect and it's amazing and everyone's life has changed because I did the thing. And I think it can be hard to say like 20 out of 100 is okay. And it's okay to start there. And it's okay that I'm continuing to work toward 100. And it's okay that I'll never reach 100. Sort of having all this flexibility and being okay with that in between space.
Clarissa, you talk about perfectionism being a double-edged sword. What do you mean by that?
That perfectionism can be both helpful and unhelpful, depending on the context, depending on how we relate to it. So, for example, there are times when rigidity can be really helpful. So we do therapy. Ethics is very important in therapy, being a responsible, ethical clinician. I think being rigid in that regard is adaptive and helpful, and I think it's good for our clients. So I think there are ways that rigidity, piece of perfectionism, can help us do our jobs well, or even wanting to achieve a certain standard is probably adaptive in some ways. Then where it becomes a double-edged sword, or the second edge, is sometimes we want to do things well and it might be really consistent with the kind of person we want to be, and we end up feeling so stressed about it because we build up all these expectations around it and what it has to be. And it might lead us to, like you were saying, feel fear, feel anxiety, worry, not be able to sleep, might make us irritable, affect our interpersonal relationships. But the kind of the core of it came from a place of, I care about my work and I want to do well and I care about helping people. So I think that it kind of can have those two sides, is the double-edged aspect to it.
And I love that example that you shared, that it can have a role. For example, a surgeon is operating and they need to be really rigid and really careful about every step that they take, and that each step is in a particular sequence, that there's not flexibility around some things, and that's okay. But that we can really make life so hard for ourselves. And this idea that we should have something a certain way, that we have this rigid idea of there's one way to do this, and that if I can't do it that way, then I can't do it. It stands in the way of so much. There's a great cost, isn't there, when it comes to living a life of perfectionism. Can you talk to us a bit about that?
Depending on the person, sometimes the cost is hidden. So let's say, like the example I gave earlier, in me trying to spend a lot of time, I think I usually give examples that are more relevant to me because that's kind of the environment I'm in. But let's say in trying to write a really good paper, I spend all this time analyzing my data, I redo it, I rewrite it, and let's say I have collaborators and then I ask them to rewrite their sections, and there's no deadline on the manuscript. So let's say I'm sitting on it for 2 years, and meanwhile, the science advances, the time and effort my participants took to produce the data is wasted. I end up not helping anyone because information on treatment is not being put out and communicated. So there's that cost. Broadly, there's the cost of my relationship with my collaborators. They might not ever want to work with me again. The stress I cause to myself, maybe in my own social life, if I'm declining invitations because it's like, no, I have to work on this. So there's all that cost. But I think the allure of perfectionism is, but it's going to feel so good once you get it right? Or everyone's going to be so impressed with you once you get it right. There's this dangle of this elusive reward. But I think because we're so focused on that, we miss all the little bits. I might not think about how my irritability and stress might be affecting my relationship with my partner, let's say.
And the example you've given is perfect, because there will be people listening who might have children who are on that path to perfectionism, or well and truly down the road. And that is an issue that, for me and my work in schools, that I hear from teachers, that those, particularly because of the anxiety that a lot of young people are experiencing, which was an issue here in Australia and around the world before the pandemic, exacerbated by the pandemic. And so your example is a perfect example, because when you are producing work at a high level, when you're in your last 2 or 3 years of high school, for example, then the time that you spend on, like I did, on this project where I cared so much about getting the cuts right on the cardboard around my headings and positioning things, and then it wouldn't be good enough. So I'd try to pull the glue off and start again. And then if that didn't work, and when I stop and think about what is important here, it's the content, it's the thinking, it's the drawing together the learning and creating a cohesive written summary or essay or whatever it is. I think if we can focus on what's worthy of our attention and what's worthy, of course, of care, but being able to sort of make a decision and be more flexible. And that's a word you've used quite a bit. And I'd love you to talk to us more about flexibility versus rigidity in the way that we think and the way that we approach tasks.
Yeah, I think a way to think about flexibility maybe is being sensitive to environmental demands or the context that you're in. I'm not sure if this is the best example, but let's say like socially, right? I act differently when I'm around different people. When I'm in front of my colleagues or in front of my boss, I'm a lot more serious and professional. When I'm with my friends, I may, make jokes more. When I'm with colleagues I'm more friendly with versus less, I also act differently. I'm acting in a certain way because this is a podcast interview. I mean, whether or not it's successful is a separate question, but that I'm adjusting based on what I perceive to be the demands of the specific space I'm in is an example of flexibility. And we all do it, most of us do. But if someone, say, is consistently very professional, even when they're with their friends, or consistently very casual, even when they're in a huge meeting with executives or something like that, that's the rigidity piece. So if we apply it to different contexts, it might be, I always need to know what I'm doing every day. Like my itinerary needs to be set. And that might be super functional when I'm going to work, when I have a routine, when I have lots of things to get done. But if on vacation I insist on that, then my family might not really enjoy themselves because I need to know what we're doing every day before we go on. So that's rigidity. Whereas flexibility might be, I don't need a routine today. Let's just take it easy. Let's see what we want to do.
We can all relate to that. We can all relate to that idea of adapting to a situation. And sometimes what that requires is for us to be able to step back a little, isn't it? To be able to step back and take a moment to consider, whether it's consciously or at a level below consciousness, what the situation requires of us. And I think that one of the things that can stand in the way of that for perfectionists are these ideas around what can be gained from being perfectionistic. And so many people are driven to excellence. And it's not that we're saying that there's nothing wrong with striving for excellence and doing great work, especially when you are doing it in a situation in your life that requires that of you. But I wonder if you could share with us, what is it about perfectionism that fuels more perfectionism? What is the thinking? What is the gain from operating in this way that stands in the way of people stepping back and being a bit more flexible?
Oh, that's such a good question. There are many variables I can think of. One that's coming to mind is, at least my experience of our society, is that it reinforces perfectionism. So, for example, like my boss would want me to be productive, probably. My students would probably benefit from me being productive. When I was in grad school, my advisor probably wanted me to be productive. And it makes everyone's jobs easier if I do a good job. So I think there's very strong kind of social, societal, cultural pressure to do well. And I think also, depending on the identities you hold, there might be a sense of needing to prove yourself or needing to establish credibility. I think that's one reason it's so reinforced, that it's this implicit standard that all of us have to do well. And I think it depends on the environment you're in. So I'm in academia, so it's pretty strong where I am. I think another pattern that you see is you sometimes do something, oh, like I did it exactly the way I wanted. And so it's a bit like gambling, right? Like you don't win every time, but you win enough times that it kind of keeps you hooked. So I think there's a bit of that process going on, that you don't know when you're going to be perfect, but when you get it, there's sort of like this belief that, oh, it means it's doable. And if it's doable, then I have to do it, which is another rule.
It's a great analogy, the gambling analogy, because that's the hook, isn't it? That every now and again I get that experience and that feeling, and yet it's so rare. And one might say perfectionism is futile in that, is anything ever perfect? And if certainly, yes, you can perfect an equation in mathematics. Certainly there are aspects of life where we can be accurate and we can get things right. But in so many aspects of life, I question as to whether or not it's even attainable. Is a piece of writing, can it ever be perfect, or can it always be adjusted and tweaked and edited in a little way here or there, extended even for a creative pursuit? There's always more paint that an artist can put on a canvas. There's always more that we can put into thinking about how something will be received. And yet, on the whole, it is really striving for something, isn't it, that's not realistic.
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's striving for something that is close to impossible to attain.
And procrastination becomes a part of this perfectionism puzzle, doesn't it? Can you talk to us a little bit about procrastination and anxiety?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. I think one thing that sometimes makes you feel a bit sad is when people think of perfectionism, their mind goes to the high achieving perfectionist. And I think there's almost this kind of common idea about like, oh, it's actually really good because, oh, so Steve Jobs would be a really good example of like, oh, this is what a perfectionist looks like. But I think it's also just as plausible that someone with perfectionism ends up feeling so much anxiety that they can't even get the first step out, right? So that's procrastination. So it might be anxiety around if I do it, I have to do 100% and I don't know if I can do it, or if I do it, it reflects on me as a person, and that's like being vulnerable. If we think of procrastination as a form of avoidance, or anxiety and avoidance are kind of like best friends.
They really are, aren't they? They really are. And I love that you've helped us to think differently, because we do. We view the world through the lens that we've developed over our own experiences, don't we? And when I think about perfectionism, I can't help but think about me and my experiences. And a lot of people listening will hopefully be starting to apply what we're talking about to their own experiences and starting to question, well, how can I make that first step? How can I support a young person in my life, or if a teacher's listening, a student in my life who is striving to be the best of the best, to get a very high score, to get into medical school, or to get into law, or to get into engineering, or to achieve something that requires excellence. How can you support people who have these perfectionistic tendencies to start to operate a bit differently?
There are so many angles from which to tackle this, but I'll jump on one thing that you mentioned earlier, which is going to the why, or the process. Like, what do I care about here? Why do I want to get into med school? Right? We don't, at least I don't imagine I want to get into med school because I want to say I went to med school. It's usually because I want to help people, because you're, at least in the US, you are accumulating a lot of debt, spending a lot of years of your life on very dense topics. And I imagine that there has to be something in there that is meaningful, that you're willing to put in all this effort. So I wonder if, like, for teachers or for younger people, maybe a reminder of, wait, why do you want to do this in the first place? And maybe having that value or that reason or that purpose play some role in influencing their behavior. In the absence of that, you get a lot of rule following of, well, because I need to get an A, because I'm a smart student and smart students get A's. And I think when we get very sucked into these rules, we can lose sight of, well, why do I even want to get an A? I think it's the difference between studying really hard for a test and memorizing everything to get an A versus really learning the material because you're curious about it, because you want to know how the world works. So I think that could be one element of something that could be helpful. I think too, understanding why someone cares about doing things in a perfect or excellent way. I think you mentioned this earlier too. There's just the struggles that people and young people have exacerbated by COVID, but I'm surprised we haven't said the word control yet, or we might have, but like so much of perfectionism is about control. And when we feel like we have no sense of control over, the many things happening around us, it can feel kind of protective, or it can feel safe to feel like you have some control over some aspect of your life. So I think if we can understand why doing things perfectly or doing things in a particular way or rigidity is important to the person, then that might be another avenue into like maybe helping them develop control in a more adaptive way, right? If the function is to gain a sense of control.
Yes, and I think one of the things too is this acceptance, and ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy, and we both love it. And acceptance when control is not something that is within your reach, or the amount of control that you might like is unattainable. Acceptance is often misunderstood. How would you talk about acceptance?
Sometimes I use the word willingness instead of acceptance or openness. I agree. I think acceptance carries this baggage of resignation, or I accept defeat, or I'm accepting, this negative outcome. So I try to describe it as a stance of being willing. So it's an active stance. We are choosing to make space for something. We're choosing to experience or be willing to experience something. I think differentiating it from tolerance, which is conditional acceptance, or an approach where it's, I will only be okay with it if you are this big, or if you stay for this amount of time, or the entire time you're just counting down the clock, waiting for it to go away, or spending a lot of effort just being with it. Whereas acceptance is in some ways difficult to learn and practice, but when you practice acceptance, at some point it feels effortless, which I think it's a paradoxical thing. It feels super effortful and effortless at the same time.
I'd agree with that. When I started the podcast, and it's called, well, Hello Anxiety, as you would know, that one of the first episodes that I recorded was with Carly Taylor. It was all about acceptance. She was a guest that I felt really comfortable starting with, because that relaxed me to do my first podcast interview, but also on a topic that Carly and I are both passionate about, and we're both ACT trained. And acceptance, I think, being something that can make such a powerful difference, not just for perfectionism, but for anxiety as a whole, can't it?
Yeah. I think what you were saying earlier about what is within our control and what isn't. And I think with anxiety, we want it to be within our control. It feels like it's within our control, or at least it seems like it should be within our control. And our experience with anxiety usually tells a different story. Yeah, it's almost like the more you try to control it, the more it kind of goes all over the place. So acceptance is sort of taking that stance of, okay, you're here, don't love it, and I'm gonna be okay with it, or I'm gonna choose to make room for it.
Choose to make room for it. And that requires us to feel how we feel, doesn't it? And experience discomfort, which is not something that everybody was taught. I know I'm raising both of my children to know and experience their feelings, and that feelings come and go, even the beautiful excitement of joyful activities. I took them to a place in Melbourne yesterday, which is an enormous outdoor wave pool where you can learn to surf. And the exhilaration of getting up on a board, our daughter got up on a board for the first time, standing on a surfboard surfing, that joyful exhilaration, even that passes. I mean, she'll wake up this morning and she'll be, a bit weary and a bit tired, and that joyful exhilaration has passed. And so that fleeting nature of emotions is important, I think, to remember. Even the ones that we love pass. And the anxiety, I think, when we make, well, I know from my own experience, when we make more room for it, we're willing to experience it. Oh, there's some sort of emergency outside. Hopefully that's addressed and that everyone's okay. When we make room for it, paradoxically, it passes more quickly. It's easier to manage. It's easier to handle.
Yeah, I think it's like that. I think it's Viktor Frankl's that quote for like, if you search for happiness, you'll never find it. I'll accept so they'll go away. So it's almost, but it's like our emotions know we can't lie to ourselves. Like if we have that, like, okay, but this will go away, I need it to go away, we won't get to that acceptance space.
That's right. And it's time. It takes time, doesn't it? And that's why conversations like this are helpful, and other conversations. I interviewed Dr. John Forsyth. We talked a lot about willingness, as you mentioned earlier. And so, yes, it's just about reinforcing these ideas and inviting people just to try things for themselves, and obviously seek help if that's warranted. When it comes to addressing our own perfectionism, or supporting maybe a young person who we can see is highly perfectionistic, you've talked about helping us or somebody we care about to see the why and what's the meaning around what they're doing, and to focus in on what matters about the task at hand, if it is a task at hand. What else can we do to support ourselves or someone we care about when it comes to perfectionism?
Depending on where that person's at, I think if there's some room for flexibility, maybe encouraging them to try different things or new things. So when I talk about rule following and perfectionism, there's also rules about how the world is. And so it might be, this is the only thing that's fun, or this is the only way for me to, live my teenage life. And expanding that person's repertoire or experience of the world, I think, can be helpful for providing new information of like, oh, I can also do things this way. And oh, I actually had fun doing this thing that I would never have tried because I didn't think I would have fun. So I think that could be another way of just allowing them to try new things or encouraging them to try new things.
I love that suggestion because it also moves the focus of attention, doesn't it, to other areas of life, and where there might be perfectionistic tendencies in academic work for a student or in professional work for an adult, that you can be imperfect, you can try something new, you can be a beginner, you can not know everything, you can not get everything right, and you can be more accepting of that perhaps in a different realm of life because you don't have those high expectations of yourself. Is that a fair conclusion?
Yeah, I think for some people, perfectionism can be more domain specific, where I really am perfectionistic, and then in this other area, but in some ways that can be an all or nothing thing, right? I'm either very perfectionistic or I don't care at all. But yeah, I think it can vary for people, for sure.
That's like me in the kitchen.
Yeah.
Oh, so funny, because I care very deeply about producing excellent work, obviously, because I care, but also because I care. I am prepared to be imperfect and to put something out into the world that might not be exactly as it could be if I had spent another 100 hours on it. But the idea that done is better than perfect means that you can actually produce something. I would never have written and published 2 books if I let that perfectionistic tendency that is within me, if I really let it rule, then those resources that have been so incredibly helpful to people wouldn't be out there in the world. And so I think that that idea that you said, I keep coming back to, of that, the why, he who has a why can bear almost any how, is Viktor Frankl as well. And if that bearing that how means putting something, submitting something, releasing something, publishing something that is excellent but not perfect, then we can find a way to have the willingness to accept that discomfort, have compassion for ourselves, know that that's human, and still produce something that is of service to other people that can make a difference if that's the area of work that you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think adjusting expectations could be another, for example, based on commercials and shows, the expectation seems to be my default should be happy. A healthy person is happy, when realistically, happy is an uncommon state for me. Like I feel fine most of the time, so I'm not deliriously happy all the time. But I think adjusting our sense of, yeah, what is realistic.
Yes. And that's one of the myths of happiness, isn't it? That it's natural and normal to be happy all the time, and that when you're not, there's something wrong. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? In the sense that it's a common belief that other people are happier than us, that happiness is the default, that we are somehow defective if we are not happy. Defective might not be quite the right choice of word, but there's something wrong with us if we're not happy because everyone else seems to be. There's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me because I don't feel good all the time?
It also relates to the cultural messaging that we get. There's that famous song, Don't Worry, Be Happy, or when people, like when little kids fall down, and they cry, or a common response is, you're okay, you're okay. As opposed to like, wow, that seems like it's really painful. Like, what can I do to support you? Even just in the way we talk to people, like if someone has a bad day, it's like, oh no, but this good thing happened. there's this sense of correction of, oh no, like that's bad and we need to change it so that it's good. Like you had a bad day, so I need to give you something that will neutralize that. And I think implicitly it just continues to reinforce this idea that a good day is the default, happy is the default. Because anytime that we're not happy, or so for example, in the US, people like to say like, oh, how are you? I'm good, you know. And sometimes I'll say, oh, I'm all right. And people will go, oh no, like what's wrong? And I'm like, no, all right is a very fine default to be at. I don't have to be good all the time. So there's a lot of that. And I'm sure kids pick that up kids are very smart.
They certainly are. And it brings me to change the subject, but recall a time when I feel like I turned one of our kids in a completely different direction with perfectionism based on a response that I made, just the segue being that kids are pretty smart. They can pick things up pretty quickly. I remember we were on the floorboards here at home doing some drawing, and oh my gosh, my drawing skills are nothing to write home about. And I loved it when you're a parent and your kids just think you're the most amazing artist in the world, for a while anyway. And we were sitting there doing some drawing and some colouring, and I would deliberately make mistakes, and then I'd just put a little line through it and say, oops, I made a mistake, and I'll start again. So one of the things that I would do is I would role model acceptance of mistake making as just being par for the course. Whereas when I was a kid, I really would have screwed that piece of paper up and started again. But it was one thing that he said, which was, he said, I'm a terrible artist. And before learning ACT, before training in acceptance and commitment therapy, my response would have been, oh, goodness, no, you're a beautiful drawer. Look at all this artwork that I've framed on the wall. Look at these paintings you've brought home. And I don't even know if he was in prep at this stage, but I didn't say that. What I said to him was, oh, you're having the idea that you're not a great artist. Is that helpful? Is that a helpful way to think about your art? And he said, no. And I said, well, maybe it might be helpful if we just keep practicing. And back we went to doing our drawing, and I never once heard the statement from him again that I'm a terrible artist. And there just seemed to be this joy and appreciation of being able to draw and scribble and colour. And that moment felt like a real turning point for me, that as parents, we can use that for ourselves, or as people, we can use those ideas for ourselves. But we can make quite a difference, can't we, when we understand perfectionism, we understand the way people think. Is there a parting piece of advice or a parting idea that you could share with us just about thinking that might extend on that example or reinforce that example just before we finish up?
I like that you brought in a diffusion example. Diffusion is the idea of taking our thoughts less seriously or not necessarily completely buying into them. So I would probably reinforce that, which is, and I think you highlighted both pieces. One is having a thought and taking it seriously. So for example, with your child, having the thought, I'm a terrible artist, and like, yep, and this is true, and I'm going to treat it like this is true, and this is, just a fact of nature. So there's the like how we can interact with the thoughts intrapersonally on an individual level. So I might notice the thought, oh, you're being so awkward, and be like, wow, that's a super unhelpful thought right now. Right. So being able to do it for ourselves, but I think like you mentioned, also being able to respond in that way to other people without being invalidating. If someone's saying like, everything's terrible, my life is going down the drain. That was such an extreme example. And being able to go like, whoa, it sounds like there's a lot going on right now. Tell me more. Rather than, oh my gosh, no, responding to the content, just being like, wow, it seems like you're really distressed. And bringing that curiosity to, I think, being able to respond in a diffuse way, I think especially for kids, seems like it would be really helpful.
Those three beautiful words, tell me more about that, or that's 5 words, isn't it? But tell me more is an invitation to open the door to a little bit more, that person to be able to express how they're feeling, what they've been through, and for us to be able to listen without, like you say, trying to fix it, trying to deny how they feel. And helping a person express how they feel is really important too, and us being open to that for our friends or our partners or our children is very special. So, Clarissa, you've shared so much with us. We've covered so much in this conversation, and I'm so grateful to have had this opportunity to talk with you.
We hear another emergency going on.
Yes. Oh, goodness. So we'll see. That's the thing. You're in a New York time zone, and so it's evening there and it's morning here. So I have 2 teenagers sleeping. So the house is very quiet. That's the beauty of recording internationally, isn't it? The book that you and Michael Tuig wrote is brilliant. I absolutely love it. It's such a powerful read, and I've highlighted, it's so cute because our daughter, she's 13 now, but a couple of years ago, she would read a fiction book and she'd say, Mum, can I highlight my book? Because she sees me doing it for work. Oh, it's so cute. It's funny how we role model for them, isn't it? Even in ways we don't even expect. Yeah, I've highlighted right through it, and I highly recommend The Anxious Perfectionist, How to Manage Perfectionism-Driven Anxiety Using Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. And Clarissa, yes, if you could please tell us how people can connect with you and learn more about you and your work.
So I have a lab website. It's POISlab.com. So it stands for Process Oriented Intervention Science Lab. So POISlab.com, and that's where information about the research that we're doing, it's all there.
Thank you. And I'll put those details in the notes, which you can find through my website, drjodirichardson.com, and look at the podcast tab or on your podcast player. Clarissa, thank you again. I'm very, very grateful for your time. It's the end of the day for you, so hopefully you can take some time now and enjoy the rest of your evening. And thank you again very much for sharing your expertise and your experience and your own journey with us here today.
Thank you. It's very nice to talk about something I care a lot about. So thank you for giving me the space.
Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.